So now we're at last getting to Mariah Edgeworth. Well, what is her connection here? Well, she wrote a novel called Harrington, and we'll talk about that specifically in a moment. And she was concerned with the alien status of homeless Jews, in the sense that should they belong in British society? Okay, and by the way, before anyone asks a question, which I won't be able to answer, I have yet to find an actual technical link. Several commentators, literary critics, have made this connection as well, so it's not me just inventing something completely out of the sky. But as far as I know, there is nothing actually written down by herself to say that she was thinking of James Harrington, but it's clear it had to be. Okay. Now, Mariah Edgeworth was of her time and class, the Anglo Irish gentry, and thus her portrayal of Jews tended to reflect the undifferentiated stereotypes still prevalent in the literature of her time, despite the improving climate noted above. But Mariah was far from typical in her passionate concern with issues of education, national culture, and gender. She's considered the Irish Jane Austen, or the female Sir Walter Scott, although she actually was the other way around. She influenced them both. She was one of the first realist writers of children's fiction. She was particularly dedicated to combating the stereotyping of the Irish by the English. She and her father, Richard Lovell Edgeworth, collaborated over many years as educators, advocating co-education and drawing on Rousseau's ideas with the goal of creating an independent thinker who understands the consequences of his or her actions. And wouldn't it be good today if we could produce those sort of children? Education, according to Mariah, is the foundation of the well-governed estate and the well-governed nation. And of course, she is a satirist of the first order, with Castle Rackrent in 1800, in which she underscored the need of improved responsibility in management of Irish estates by their owners. Responsible management by Irish landowners, which necessitates being resident, is the subject of her novel, The Absentee. In this work, there are only two bad characters, a corrupt Irish agent stroke middleman, appropriately called Old Nick, and a London coachmaker stroke moneylender, the Jew, Mordecai. When Lady Culloden, wife of the owner of the Irish estates, agrees to cease her life of shallow pleasure-seeking absenteeism in London and to return to Ireland, both agent and moneylender vanish. They're gone from the story. No more absentee, no more agent, no more Jew. Mordecai's apparently insignificant role has been purely to fuel upper-class conspicuous consumption, encouraging Lord and Lady Culloden to spend more than their neglected Irish estates can provide. Mordecai has no true home. He belongs only to the city, where he practices deceit and not only greases the wheels of consumerism, but he also makes them as a coachmaker. At the end of the novel, Mordecai's Irish employees in the coachmaking business go home to Ireland to the Culloden's estate, but the Jew has no place. The Absentee ends with two homogeneous nations, each with their own place. The English stay in England, the Irish stay in Ireland, and there's one wandering Jew. Now we're at last getting to Harrington. Hang in there. The end is not in sight.
I'm off.
Feel free, David. In 1850, an American Jewish woman, Rachel Mordecai Lazarus, wrote a letter to Mariah that initiated a 25-year correspondence from her home in North Carolina, complaining of the depiction of this Jewish character, Mordecai, in The Absentee. According to Rachel, Mordecai reflects the old accepted stereotype rather than the reality she experiences as a Jew in America, where, quote, different religions and cultures live together, accepting the undisguised visible differences as irrelevant. She maintains that every group can preserve its character in this happy country. Oh boy, she didn't know Obama, did she? Where religious distinctions are hardly known. Where character and talents are all sufficient to gain advancement, we find the Jews to form a respectable part of the community. They are in most circumstances liberally educated, many following the honourable professions of the law and physic, with credit and ability, and associating with the best society our country affords. Country clubs, no. Rachel went on to comment on the principles that Mariah and her father had expounded in their treatise, Practical Education, that education played a decisive role in forming character. So how could Mariah believe that Jews were by nature Shylocks? Now this is the old nature versus nurture argument, but it's a very good point. Rachel had conceived the highest ideas of the English from her reading of English history and literature. This misapprehension that English society was not anti-Semitic prompted Mariah to write her novel Harrington, which can be read as a correction to Rachel's misunderstanding of the English situation by demonstrating just how strong and protean an anti-Jewish prejudice remains in all levels of society. The novel traces the journey of the narrator from being a classic Jew-hater to holding a totally philo-Semitic position, and yet remains unconvincing and unsatisfying in its ambiguity and the depiction of its Jewish characters. The narrator Harrington tells of how his hatred of Jews originated in childhood and was fostered in English society, and the struggles by which his mature reason and humanity have been able to control and master his imagination and antipathies towards Jews. In this first letter, Rachel raises the issue. Now this to me is a really important point, and I'm sorry if I'm going on too long and you're getting tired, but you've really got to listen to this. Rachel raises the issue of how ideas and images from reading or hearing stories influence our perception of the world. And she held writers responsible for the effects of their stereotypes. Harrington exemplifies this. He was already programmed to extreme fear of Jews at a tender age. Now, at the age of 6, he notices an old Jew in the light kindled in the road outside by the lamplighter. An old man, the Jew, not the lamplighter, with a long white beard and dark visage, the cry of, "Old clothes, old clothes, old clothes." I couldn't understand the words he said, but as he looked up at our balcony, he saw me and smiled. And I remember thinking that he had a good-natured countenance. Harrington then refuses to obey his nurse in coming to bed, and she says, "If you don't come quietly this minute, Master Harrington, I'll call to Simon the Jew there, and he shall come up and carry you away in his great bag." To my fancy, says the child, recounting this, the look of his eyes and his whole face had changed in an instant. I was struck with terror. The nurse continues to use the threat of abduction by Simon to ensure Harrington's good behavior, and uses a story about a Jew in Paris who sold, wait for it, pork pies. What else? He snatched children from his dark alley, and his wife tempted them in with sweets. Ooh, Hansel and Gretel. Yeah. He snatched children from his dark alley, and where they put in the cellar, and they returned into pork pies. Now, nurse assures little Harrington that there are similar Jews with similar cellars in London. Poor fellow, he's absolutely terrorized by this stage. In self-interest, later on, the same nurse, Fowler, tries to undo the damage which has rendered Harrington so permanently hysterical that she can't deal with him, and that makes him the talk of the town, but to no avail. She brings Simon into the house, gets him to empty his bag to show how innocuous it really is, and he offers sweets to Harrington as well. And maybe in lieu of the pork pie story, that wasn't such a good idea, but at any rate, he doesn't accept them. And he can't see, and this to me resonates so much, if you allow me to make a big leap now. Those of us who are in any way, however small, involved in trying to deal and get going a dialogue about Israel, you run into this the whole time. No, my mind is made up. Don't give me any facts. You say there's nothing in your bag? I can see it. It's full of Jewish pies. Anyway, it goes on today, and it is so difficult to counteract, isn't it? Okay, back to our sheet. An older Harrington finds his opinions of Jews confirmed by what he reads, not only in the old storybooks, where the Jews are sure to be wicked as the bad fairies of bad genii, but in almost every work of fiction I found them represented as hateful beings, nay, even in modern tales of very late years since I have come to man's estate, I have met with books by authors professing candor and toleration. They are invariably represented as beings of mean, avaricious, unprincipled, treacherous character. Harrington comments for Jewish dress and pronunciation were mimicked and characterized. Now, another little important point. Later in the novel, Harrington recognizes that the effects of cultural vehicles of prejudice need to be undone. He helps Mr. Montenero, whom I will tell you about in a moment, one of the Jewish characters, who's a rich art collector, destroy a painting that Montenero has bought at auction, an anti-Semitic painting called The Dentition of the Jew, and the description of it is absolutely revolting. And he is there when Montenero shreds it and burns it to get rid of it, which is why he bought it, to stop it from falling into hands that would use it as propaganda. And he says at that point, every record of cruelty and intolerance, and everything that can keep hatred and vengeance between Christians and Jews alive needs to be extirpated. Harrington's Jew-hating father, whose hatred is irrationally xenophobic, confirms his son in his feelings. Harrington Sr., an MP, had voted against the government, wait for it, over the 1753 Jewish Naturalization Act. He was furiously against naturalization. He considered all who were for it as enemies of England and of religion. After listening to his father and his cronies over the port, Harrington's still young enough that he hasn't been sent away to school, Harrington answers a question from another guest, after all, why should not the Jews be naturalized? And he replies, why, ma'am? Because the Jews are naturally an unnatural pack of people, and you can't naturalize what is naturally unnatural. Doesn't it sound like all those known unknowns? When Harrington goes to school, his prejudice gradually changes. A young peddler, Jacob, who sells stuff and tuck to the boys, he describes as unlike to Shylock as it is possible to conceive. Only another 2 pages after this, hang in there. Each week, I don't see why you find it so funny, David. I'm giving people notice that they can, unless they need to go to the loo, they can just hold on. Each week, Jacob is tormented by the gang, but doesn't retaliate. Harrington defends Jacob to young Lord Mowbray, his schoolmate, and says, this is Harrington saying, he wouldn't treat a dog so. Mowbray says, this is a Jew. Harrington says, a fellow creature. He is, quote, speaking on the side of humanity. The Jew has become a human being. First step in the overturning of the stereotype. Harrington's next Jewish encounter is at Cambridge, where he meets Rabbi Israel Lyons, who teaches Hebrew and is a botanist and mathematician of renown. He is as different as can be imagined from Harrington's idea of a rabbi. Young, of modern dress, beardless, his character representing the assimilated Jew is based on Moses Mendelssohn. Harrington credits Dr. Lyons with removing any lingering wisps of prejudice once and for all. At the university, it had been my good fortune to become acquainted with one whose superior abilities and kindness of disposition had formed in my mind associations of quite an opposite nature. Lyon gives Harrington a letter of introduction to one Mr. Montenero, Spanish-born Jew, a cultivated collector of art who has lived in America and has come with his daughter Berenice to London to see if British society will accept them. They are seeking a true home. The father is an example, as are all the Jewish characters in the novel, of the good Jew. And he's just too good to be true. He's dignified, courteous, benevolent, an easy conversationalist, totally gentlemanlike. He exhibits liberality and enlargement of mind, philosophic calmness and moderation. Even Harrington's rabidly anti-Semitic mother has to admit he is an uncommonly agreeable man. Berenice is, of course, equally perfect, with a countenance of great sensibility, dignified simplicity, graceful modesty of appearance. A complete opposite to the vapid, shallow, avaricious, spoiled, selfish Lady Anne Mowbray, whom Harrington is meant to marry. Now here we see an interesting manifestation of Jewish and Christian characters turned upside down. They're reversed. All the Jews in the novel are as Christ-like as can be imagined. All the so-called Christian virtues are theirs, while the Christian characters exhibit all the negative qualities that were stereotypically Jewish: avarice, vengefulness, deceit, etc. And I think this is Mariah Edgeworth going way over the top, but anyway. Okay. The odious Lord Mowbray is a cunningly manipulative rival for Berenice's hand, but she rejects him, and all comes right in the end. Harrington Sr., who had sworn to disinherit his son if he married a Jewess, declares, "My prejudices against the Jews I give up. You," meaning Berenice, "have conquered them all." Harrington himself, however, is a problem. Despite his love for Berenice being based not just on passion, but justified by reason, because of her wonderful character, nothing but the difficulty about her religion stood between me and happiness. That is, no negative personal traits, but the unbridgeable gulf of creed. Now, we have a little interlude which we must mention. Before the denouement, Mr. Montenero displays his heroic nature in the gallant and courageous behaviour in dealing with a rioting London mob. These were the Gordon Riots of 1780, which were a terrifying manifestation of xenophobia. Would anyone like to jump in here? I mean, I can tell you about them, but my voice is getting tired. Anyone have anything to say about the Gordon Riots? No? Okay, I'll go on. We're nearly there, we're nearly there. In 1778, the Papists Act sought to mitigate some of the official discrimination against Catholics. Lord George Gordon, and he's a fascinating guy. Have any of you heard about what happened to him after this? So we'll mention it. Lord George Gordon, who was eccentric, which is saying it mildly, head of the Protestant Association, inflamed a mob 40,000 to 60,000 strong, with fears of popery, that Catholics, having been let off these onerous restrictions, might join forces with continental Catholics, and so they marched on the House of Commons. Now, don't forget, 1778, there's what we Americans call the War of Independence, was going on, and that involved France and Spain as well. So it's not just, there's a huge amount of turmoil going on yet again. And of course, Catholics weren't allowed previous to this to serve in the armed forces, although there were some. And this freed up a huge amount of people to come and fight for the crown. Okay. So they might, anyway, Mr. Montenero rescues some of the Christian characters in the novel and brings them into his house and behaves very well. Montenero's bravery teaches Harrington that an alien national identity can come to be valued as an aid in preserving a stable social reality against public upheaval. But even being an asset to national security doesn't qualify a Jew to belong. Montenero further rescues Harrington Sr. from bankruptcy. You'd think that would do the trick. At last, all objections are dealt with. And Harrington has even brought himself to the point of ignoring the difference of religion in order to wed. Wake up everyone, mirabile dictu, Berenice is actually a Christian. Can you believe it? Her mother, who is conveniently dead, was the daughter of the English ambassador to Spain, where Mr. Montenero had been living. Not only is her mother not Jewish, which in itself, of course, is the issue, but she has been baptized and brought up as a Bible-reading Protestant. Now, this is a very ambivalent, I think, and disappointing ending. I mean, why bother to write the book at all? Although Harrington travels from inherited prejudice to acceptance of difference and can be seen even to atone or make reparation for his previous desperately wrongly held views, he doesn't really engage with what it means to be Jewish in an alien culture. The novel's not about multiculturalism or a plea for reconciliation, but a liberal early 19th century English Christian's assessment of society's willingness to overcome prejudice and to explore the possibility of two dissimilar social groups sharing the same space. Hence the ambivalence, I believe, of the ending. The evil Shylock stereotype, inherited from centuries of ingrained prejudice, is replaced in both James Harrington's benign and admiring picture of a Jewish national character that might or might not have existed 2,000 years ago, and in Mariah Edgeworth's portrayal of her Jewish characters in Harrington. So they've replaced the bad stereotype by an exactly opposite but equally unreal portrait, the super-good Jew without fault or blemish. Jacob with his stoic refusal to complain or seek revenge for the torture at the hands of Christian schoolboys. Berenice as a type of Jewish heroine, like Rebecca in Ivanhoe, and her father with his many virtues. Now Dickens, who also wrote a novel in response to accusations of anti-Semitism, does the same with his non-believable super-Jew, Mr. Rhea, in Our Mutual Friend. Disraeli's Sidonia is another in this vein. It is only with George Eliot's Daniel Deronda that we get the complex character of Mordecai, the visionary intellectual, warts and all, a real person. But credible as he is as a rounded character, and despite not being a stereotype, even for as a real person, not a cardboard cutout, there is no home in Britain for him. Mordecai is focused on the promised land, but he dies before he can make Aliyah, and he hands on his Zionist torch to Daniel to make aspiration into reality. So let me close with a comment about ambivalence, stereotype, and homelessness. Berenice can find a husband and home in London, but she isn't really Jewish. Nor is her father, although he never converts. The lunch seller who helps Montenero to deal with the violent crowd during the riots says to him, "Never fear, dearie." Well, she didn't say dearie, but something equivalent to it. "Jew as you have the misfortune to be, you are the best Christian anyway I ever happened on." The ubiquity and tenacity of the stereotypical money-lending bogeyman Jew is necessary so that the Jew can be identified as alien and kept outside, never admitted to the inner circle, no matter how superhumanly he performs and manifests his worthiness to belong, no matter how many Jewish naturalization bills are passed and not rescinded. The assimilating Jew disturbs the social order. The Jew as irredeemable alien and bogeyman who can mysteriously metamorphose into an upper-class Englishman is deeply, deeply disturbing, because his assumption of automatically inherited privilege is shaken. Do Gentile Western societies really want to give the Jew a home? And one more question. What if James Harrington's vision to lease Ireland in perpetuity to the Jews had come true? So take those home and think about them. Thank you very much.